Welcome to Healthcare du Jour, where we dish up and digest the latest in healthcare. For the next 30 minutes, sit back as we bring insight, commentary, and discussion on trending topics to the table, all expertly served up by our host and his guests. Healthcare du Jour is sponsored by SA Ignite, the law offices of Miracle Connell, and the Compliancy Group. And now here is your host, Matt Fisher.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining as we dive into the hottest topics in healthcare. I'm your host, Matt Fisher. On the menu today is Dr. Tamara St, Chief Innovation Officer at Xerox Health. Welcome, Tamara.
Good to be here, Matt.
Yeah, no, it's great to be able to chat with you. And for people who are listening, Tamara and I were both social media ambassadors at HIMSS this past March, so it was great to actually be able to meet you in person, because I feel like so many people I've interacted with online, it's taken years and years before I get to meet them in real life.
Yeah, it certainly is a different experience. It feels like there's one personality out there, and it's nice to see the personality behind that personality when we finally meet in person.
Yeah, no, I agree. It certainly allows for much deeper conversations, and I think directly led to being able to have you come on the show today.
It did.
So why don't, if you don't mind, why don't you just give everyone a kind of a brief introduction and background on who you are and what you do?
Great. Thanks, Matt. So as you mentioned, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Xerox Healthcare, and my role is primarily around building our innovation roadmap and strategy for Xerox Healthcare. And that looks a little like understanding what's going on at the forefront of healthcare, being able to leverage our footprint and competencies to develop what our innovation strategy is overall. And a little bit that looks like, what are we going to do with our R&D dollars, what types of partnerships, what acquisitions that we want to make. And my team is responsible for incubating those opportunities until they mature and they can be placed in the business groups within healthcare.
Yeah, so it definitely sounds like you're able to keep your kind of finger on the pulse of whatever is hottest at the moment, and hopefully keeping an eye on and predicting what will be right around the corner.
Yeah, and isn't that easy, huh, Matt?
Oh yes, especially in this field. It's your best guess could be completely waylaid by whatever the government decides to do.
Well, it's really interesting because I've been in healthcare for almost 3 decades now, and I feel like every decade we say we're in the middle of a transformation. I'd like to think that this decade that tagline, that cliche is definitely true.
Yes, no, I think that would certainly be helpful for the industry, and maybe digging into some of those taglines. I know we have been talking about population health as one of the focuses for your work. So maybe to help set it up for everybody, from your perspective, what is population health?
Yeah, and isn't it nice when you're in an organization that's knee-deep in healthcare like we are, you can actually come up with your own definition. And part of us deriving a definition, it stemmed from doing about 24 months of research in the field. And a lot of our research was dependent on leveraging what I consider our core competencies. And those of you who don't know Xerox in healthcare, we have government healthcare, pharma, life sciences, payer, provider, and employer. So it's a really broad footprint. And so we were able to meet with experts, industry business leaders, and of course our clients and customers. And we came up with our definition that tried to marry, again, what our core business is and what our understanding of the transformation that's going on in the market and the pain points. And so our definition is managing the health outcomes of a defined patient population through technology and services with the intent of achieving better health outcomes, patient experience, and cost savings. And that sounds like I'm reading it, and I was, but let me pull apart a couple of points on that. The defined patient population, I think, is important because during the journey we learned that there's a difference between population health and population health management. And for me, that difference was that defined population. And population health, it's really a community-based approach. And in population health management, you are often very financially driven to be able to manage the that population, whether it's with your Medicare, Medicaid contracts or the value-based contracts that are coming down the pike. And not a lot of people really understand how to even define what that attributable population is. And then the other part of it is the health outcomes, experience, and cost savings. And that should sound very familiar because that's the triple aim. And then the component around the technology and services was our understanding that there were a lot of point solutions out in the marketplace on population health, and that people really needed kind of a full suite of services. They needed to not just have point solutions, but be able to tackle a problem more holistically. And that really took analytics, technology, and services, and not just a small piece, but kind of being able to look at the whole picture and understanding systemically and holistically how to approach it.
Right. So kind of taking, I think, diving into the first piece of what you just said first, I know you said you spent, I believe you said 24 months researching and looking around the market, and then that is what led you to develop your definition of population health. How do you see your definition lining up with some of the others that might be out there, or does it differ from the common definitions because of some misconceptions?
You know, one of the things I think we found, Matt, is that depending where you sit in the ecosystem, as a vendor, your definition changed. And I think that made a lot of sense. We developed a construct of the market, and it had a very different look than any of the analyst reports or market reports we've been reading. And it was 3 concentric circles that showed the services component, with the most innermost circle being clinical, and then the outermost being administrative, and the middle being paraclinical. So the understanding the set of services that bring to bear for population health management are definitely physician and caregiver intervention, which is clinical, paraclinical, which you may think around case managers and disease managers, and then administrative being that component of kind of checking you in, making sure you're eligible, and all those non-clinical aspects to services. And then we bookmarked it with technology and analytics. So technology perhaps being telehealth, and analytics being the data that you need to understand and stratify and segment the population that's attributable. And I think that was a really unique way for us to really understand what's going on in the industry in terms of being able to deliver that holistic package. And we found that depending on where folks sat in that diagram, it changed their perception of the meaning of population health management.
Right.
And I think that was kind of a big aha. And then when we went out and talked with caregivers, depending on where you sat, whether you were in an acute hospital setting, whether you were a primary care physician, or you were in a patient-centered medical home, folks' definition really changed in terms of where they sat on that care continuum. So I think I think it's a really fun way to start the conversation, which is how do you define population health management?
Yeah, that's very interesting that you're saying that the view of what it means is really driven by where you're sitting within the delivery of the care. Mm-hmm. So do we need to align so everyone has at least a common thread through it, or is it important that you have differing views based upon where you sit basically in those concentric circles?
Yeah, so I think I started my journey early in those 24 months really being concerned that we didn't have a common definition, and thought, how are we going to kind of skin this cat if we're not aligned in that perception? And, one of the things you and I talked about before this is talking about what is the definition of quality. And maybe I'll interject that thread here, because now I believe that we don't necessarily have to have the same definition of population health management, and that maybe optimizing locally based on what we can influence in the care continuum or as a vendor actually does move the cause. But I think that where we perhaps need to have better alignment is in our definition of the quality of care, or quality or outcomes.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point, because I know, as you said, we had talked about quality before, and I think a lot of that plays into value-based care, which you referenced a couple minutes ago as well, since as we know, value-based care is based upon these quality metrics. And do we, like, in your view, do we have good definitions of quality or good measures of quality? Too many, or how should we go about defining that?
Quality, don't we?
Yeah.
So I actually empathize a lot with providers at this juncture. I feel like their lives are very schizophrenic at this juncture. If you think about, Matt, this transition that we're facing from fee-for-service world to a value-based care or risk-based models, our providers have to have a foot in both worlds right now. There are a couple of providers that I know that are 100% in risk-based, and I think that's pretty amazing. They're few and far between. But I think it's really hard to live in both worlds. Then the added element of complexity is the fact that every payer that they're involved with has a different set of quality metrics. So if they're living in both a private payer and public payer, a Medicare, Medicaid world, those quality metrics aren't aligned. And it's pretty amazing. I really try to even myself get my head around all the concepts and all the movement that we're having, especially on the government side, and it's pretty onerous. And if you think about the fact that physicians and hospitals have so much work ahead of them and so many other parts of their business, the fact that they have to understand how to measure, how to report, and how to improve on a myriad of quality metrics. And we all, I think, have been to that school where you can only really measure and improve on, what is it, a half a dozen. There's a magic number there, and we've certainly exceeded that magic number.
Yeah, no, I agree. That seems to be a common theme you hear, is that, as you said, we need to simplify it. We need to reduce the number of measures and align it. And if I recall correctly, wasn't there an announcement of some coordinated effort that was going to be worked upon by private payers and Medicare?
I believe I've heard that in the works. I can't reference it specifically, but it's interesting. You had John on your radio show before. It's really interesting how he's coming out and even talking about MACRA. And supposedly we're supposed to have additional insight with MACRA, but I don't propose to be an expert, but it's really interesting talking with folks about how hard it is just to deconvolute MACRA. So I think we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's to some degree you hope that you can have that good private-public interplay, because I feel like oftentimes you get quicker and more advanced innovation through the private industry as opposed to necessarily the public sphere, just because of the restrictions and the public comment periods and all the openness that just the natural pace of how things move with the government. That especially here, it feels like you need that interplay to really achieve a meaningful goal.
I agree, and it's interesting because I generally agree with you on the point that it's private that generally pushes us from an innovation and a technology perspective. I think in this case, because there's so much, there's such a challenge in terms of moving away from fee-for-service, I think that it's going to be the government that really pushes us into a value-based world. And it's interesting. I was just reading an article that was talking about technology and movement in our industry, and it's really wild when we think about the alignment that really allows consumerism to push other industries. Whether it's the travel industry or the financial industry, and the fact that consumerism has really driven different models and the adoption of technology. And I think we're touching on something that's really at the heart of what actually moves and pushes things. And in healthcare, we finally are having this consumerism, that wave with the ACA that really should be able to push us. If we can create the alignment where all the stakeholders are being rewarded for the same thing, I think we're going to be able to move through this transformation more quickly.
No, and first, I definitely agree with you that in this case, to get away from fee-for-service and into value-based care, I wholeheartedly agree with you that because Medicare is behind it and is committed to doing it, that is going to be the difference maker. Because I think, as you said, without that, I don't think the private payers would necessarily get there. But then moving into where you just went with the consumerism, and that we need all the stakeholders aligned and also incentivized to kind of shift that a little bit, do we then also need to include the patients in that dialogue as well? Because I feel like with everything that's been talked about so far, it's all talking about the industry, and it's not talking about how do we bring in the patients and the individuals who are receiving the care into that discussion as well.
Oh, definitely, Matt. And you and I have participated and been at the periphery of a lot of discussions around patient engagement. And even the quality metrics are starting to reflect patient satisfaction, patient engagement. Even if we talk about med adherence, you go right to patient engagement. Because I've shared with you that Xerox did a survey as part of those 24 months of research in population health management and value-based care. And what's really interesting is that payers and providers basically say for value-based care to be successful, we have to be able to engage the patient. And what's really interesting as we talk to patients and talk with them about now they have higher premiums, they have more responsibility for their health care, they want to be more involved. And what's really wild is they're asking for the healthcare stakeholders, physicians, their insurance companies, to help make it easier for them to be more engaged. So for me, I completely agree. I think both parties agree, or all three parties agree. I think they're still just talking past each other, though.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And it's, from my perspective, I think to some degree there's regulatory impediment to it. Because as you said, and thank you for sharing the survey, that survey definitely showed that, as you said, payers, providers, and the patients all want to collaborate. They all want to start working off of the same page. But, and I saw that, I think it was at Geisinger recently that they said that they're trying to do these, refunds or, not charge copays or something if there's, if they have to wait too long or they're not satisfied with the service they get. From my legal point of view, I question how that's allowed, because there are very tight regulations around that and lots of guidance and concerning statements of concern, what we can call them, from the government. So to me the question is, are the regulations preventing or inhibiting the type of engagement that everyone seems to be looking for?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I've really ever thought about it in that perspective. When I think about it more generally, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time, Matt, because it's not to offend the lawyers or anything, but I think it's really, really wild how, again, when we take a page from transportation or travel, or even the music industry, what's happened is that consumers really push something and they don't even mind doing it illegally for a while until folks start to understand, okay, how can we actually handle this new model now and put the right risk mitigations and protections for liability, for privacy, security behind it to make it actually scalable. So it's funny, I don't know if it will actually be, rebates on co-pays. It may be rewards points or, something a little bit milder. But I think in this new wave of consumerism, I think consumers could care less, right? They're going to make demands and they're going to go to where those demands are met. And it's almost like we kind of have to follow them and figure out how to create the construct to keep everybody safe and happy.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you, and you're right. Other industries are doing and have done things like this. I'm just concerned that you don't have the same freedom within the healthcare industry, especially because from the patient is never going to be held liable for anything by the government, at least in my opinion, because most of the laws that you look at don't apply to them. But if the provider or the health insurer does something that arguably runs afoul of their regulations, all of a sudden that could result in a multi-million-dollar hit to them, which
Right,
means they're going to go out, it could push them out of business.
right,
And,
right.
and to kind of pick up on one thing you said, maybe it could be a point reward system for patients. In my opinion, I really do think you need to have something like that to engage them and to incentivize a change of behavior. But I don't know if that's allowed. I would probably need to do a fair amount of research because my
Right,
gut feeling is that would violate like a patient inducement portion of the law.
right, right. Yeah, no, sometimes it feels like we're moving into the Wild West a little bit. And to kind of further that point, going back to the survey that we conducted, I think that providers don't really know exactly what's beyond the horizon. As we talked, they know that there's this move and shift to value-based contracting. Everybody knows about the CMS basically saying 50% of payments will be value-based by 2018. But in our survey, providers basically said they're very concerned about the risk that's associated with it. We also found out that roughly 10% of their portfolio are currently value-based, so they certainly have a lot of ground to make up. We also found out that roughly 77% of them believe that they're losing money currently on their value-based contracts. So I think that the future's uncertain. We know there's probably not one single path on how to get there. And when we asked people whether they needed help with services, or did they need help with technology, or do they need help with analytics in terms of being able to manage that journey, that transformation from fee-for-service to value-based care, it was they needed help across the board in all three areas. And for me, kind of trying to dig a little bit behind what did that data mean, I think that there's perhaps a little bit of, I don't know where to start, I just need blanket help. So I think there really is an uncertain future, whether it's regulations and actually how do you actually get there with the patient engagement element. How do I negotiate with how do providers negotiate with payers to be able to create contracts and metrics that they can meet? I think there's still a lot of unknown and a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. It's because I'm in Massachusetts in the Northeast, I feel like sometimes I have a distortive view of how things are because especially in Massachusetts, they are pushing things further down that line. I have a client that is predominantly risk-based at this point. So I wonder if, as you were saying, as you found in the survey, it sounded like providers maybe had 10% of their business was in the risk-based value type contracting. I wonder if you need to hit a certain critical percentage of your contracting to then actually invest the appropriate resources to be able to succeed.
I think that's a really important discussion topic. As we mentioned, I think having your feet in both worlds isn't helpful. And Matt, I'm sure you're reading much of the same stuff I am, that folks really want to stay in the fee-for-service world as long as possible and then kind of make that transition. So I think people are trying to figure out, can they straddle, where's that tipping point? So, one of the things that we learned in our research is that folks need a tool to be able to handle this intermediate state. So one of the things that we've wrapped into our solution is the ability to take the aggregate portfolio of contracts and understand where you're earning money and where you actually need to be to earn money on your risk-based contract. So not having to steal away from your fee-for-service dollars whenever you're making a big move, but making a move that actually saves one part of your contract portfolio and addresses the quality and health outcome needs on your risk-based portfolio, and being able to have visibility across not only that contract portfolio, but the populations that line up underneath there, and understanding how you can move the needle systemically, and then, in your one-to-one population health management programs is going to be an important tool, because I don't know if we really know what that tipping point is. I think it's, it's going to be a set of variables across your entire contract portfolio.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a very important point. What you just said is, you have to do pre-planning. You have to examine what you've got and how I'm not going to say if you transition, but when you transition, what that impact is going to be. So I think for people to know that there are tools like that available is very important. So kind of picking up on that, what do you think are the most important tools available now? And then also to kind of push you a little bit, of what tools would you like to see developed that you think might be missing? Or what are you working on?
Yeah, there you go. So in our research, I think we found some areas that were real sticking points for providers as they're transitioning. One is I talked about this actuarial view. So being able to understand, what have I promised? What outcomes have I promised? And taking a look at my population, how close am I to getting there? So being able to understand it on a PM basis, what is my trajectory, and what opportunities do I have through intervention to bend that cost curve so I can meet those contractual obligations. So, we call that kind of this actuarial tool. And we think that there are some folks that are out there that are developing it, some folks that have kind of a view towards it, but we think that this has to be bread and butter during this kind of next 5 years, this messy period, right? And then I think the second is attribution. I read some really staggering data on, especially in the CMS world, how difficult it is to actually know what population you're responsible for. And that some, talking with our clients, they had created some models, and some of them had gotten it right like by 80%, some by 13%. So just being able to determine who your cohort is that you're responsible for is really important. And that's very difficult, especially in the CMS world. And then I think the other element is just stitching together a population health management approach that isn't that aren't a set of point solutions. And so, you're asking what's missing. I think it's this kind of integrated view. And talking with our clients, especially in the ACO world, one of the CEOs said, "Don't give me another ED tool. Help me meet the outcomes that I'm responsible for, and help me really move the needle." So I think it's being able to look at where a client sits holistically and being able to give interventions that give immediate ROI, because as you alluded to, Matt, these building a population health management infrastructure is a big investment. And I think if you can do it by actually funding itself through systemic returns on investment that allow you to fund the population health management framework that allows you to do one-to-one interventions, I think that that's going to be an important move. Giving a nod, I know I talked about those components that are missing, and they sound, really technology and analytics heavy, but there are a few folks out there in the world that I really, really admire. One of them is Health Catalyst, and I know we both know folks from Health Catalyst. I think Premier, Susan DeVore's team, is doing a really nice job creating kind of this ecosystem that allows them to tackle big problems. And I love Iora Health. Now I know these are not, kind of your typical vendors in population health management, but maybe that's why I like them all so much.
Yeah, no, and just because it's not your typical vendor doesn't mean, maybe it means that they've got a fresh approach on things. But I definitely like what you just said, which is the solutions need to be holistic, which to me makes sense, because when you're talking population health, you're talking about care that's holistic. So why shouldn't the tools match the goal of what you're trying to do?
But don't you think that actually kind of gets to the heart of our legacy problem in healthcare, is that everything has been so siloed, and we can take any part of our industry and talk about the siloed nature. So I don't think we're going to solve the problems being siloed any longer.
Yes, no, and I think that is a great point, and unfortunately, believe it or not, we're almost out of time, and I think that is
it would go fast.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point to end on, which is we need to break out of the silos and bring everything together. So, I'd like to thank you, Tamara, for a great conversation, and thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely look to have you back as these conversations progress. And thank you to everyone for listening. Keep the dialogue going and connect with me at #HCDEJURE on Twitter. I'm Matt Fisher. Until next time.